thank you so much. And if you were with me the last few times, you know that I'm trying out some new things with the technology and trying to share some clips with you and some websites. So I'm going to try to do that again tonight, since 2 hours is a long time just to listen to me. And so, thanks for being patient with me taking a bit to navigate around my machine and the webinar technology as well. So welcome to the final session. We have covered a little bit so far about perspective, but about the problem itself with behavior problems. And the very first session, we sort of centered the conversation around some of the mistakes that we as care providers or that we as educators might make in trying to remedy somebody's behavior needs. And I talked a little bit about how it's really hard to solve a behavior outside of any context, and that we need to look at the entire situation with a person, involve the person if possible, and even more importantly, in that first session we talked about how the focus of the work, the focus of solving behavior problems, really needs to be on raising the quality of life for people with disabilities, but also for everybody that supports people with disabilities, because their life feels calmer, more secure, and safer. So does ours, probably. And so I think, hopefully you've seen, I think this work is important, especially in that conversation. And hopefully you've seen that through the trajectory so far, that there are some alternative ways to think about these problems. So not only rethinking behavior itself, but in our second session, looking at things like the body and sensory needs, and um, movement disturbance, movement differences, how people perceive the world differently, and how sometimes people feel very uncomfortable in their own bodies, and how people can feel oftentimes frustrated because I think maybe outsiders looking in can think that some of our kids are being, maybe a little bit bizarre on purpose, and are trying to make our lives more difficult. And I think the case more often than not is that kids are trying, so hard to just show up and to do their best. And hopefully some of the strategies that we have covered and that we will cover today will help not only children or students or individuals with disabilities do their very best, but will help us feel competent in providing the very best support. So today I'm going to get a little bit more focused. The last session was, again, primarily around the body itself and things that we can consider with kids and making them feel more organized, and using strategies that will support some of those areas of need. Today, you'll see some shadows there. You'll see definitely some recommendations that piggyback on things that we saw in the first week or in the second week. But I tried to pick 10 things that discreetly are really important on their own, that even though there may be some overlap, that if you're doing a mini session with your colleagues, or if you are trying to share guidance for other family members, that you could go to these 10 ideas and say, okay, these top, I like, those 10 ideas are helpful. I especially like these 3, and I'm going to try to employ them. Or I'm going to try to take these 2 and really work them into my, my classroom. So as I'm talking, I'm not expecting that that you'll love all 10 of these and that you'll want to adopt them immediately. But I'm hoping that by the end of this time together, that you will pick 2 or 3 that you think would work well in your day with students, or in your life with your own children, that you think you could, fairly easily employ or would like to learn more about. So as I speak, maybe just kind of highlight those 2 or 3 as we go about, I'd really like to focus more on this. And that way, even if you don't find one, in every single example that I'm sharing, maybe you will find just those few that that you can take away and just start to practice, immediately. So the very first one seems kind of like something that might be a little bit obvious, especially if you are an educator or a care provider. And number one always has to be focus on the relationship. I talk a lot about that because I think in the literature, again, when we think about the literature of disability and we think about the literature of behavior needs, I'm always struck by how clinical the language can be and how we think about targeting the behavior, and then we identify the behavior, and then we think about ways to reinforce the behavior. We think about ways to motivate the person. And I think how can you do any of that unless you make a connection with this individual? And none of us probably would behave very well if we didn't have if there weren't really, meaningful relationships in our lives. I think about my own. I have two teenage girls. I have two young middle school girls, and I think even though I think they like school, I don't know if their friends weren't there, if there weren't relationships there. And if they didn't have a relationship with a single teacher, I think it would be very hard to get them to school. And I think this is true of most people and most children for sure. So I'm reminded, my background is in significant disability, and I'm reminded of the work of someone that I consider a great teacher of mine, even though I only met him once, but I read his work. I've read his work since I was since I was a new teacher. His name's Herb Lovett, and some of you may know of his work if you're an academic or if you've been, teaching for a while. And he was somebody who thought a lot about this relationship piece and how do we support people when they may have so many significant behavior issues, lots of significant behavior issues, and seemingly few resources or connections in the world. I remember in one of his books that he wrote about going to group homes. Now, when Herb was doing a lot of his early work, it would have been in group homes. And if he was working with adults at the time, I would imagine a lot of the people that he is writing about in these books from the 1980s would have been people that may have been institutionalized at some point in their life. He was probably working with people who had maybe lost some touch with their families because of the way services were provided many years ago. And he talks about going into meetings with people, and he would get to the group home or get to the institution if he was working in an environment like that. And he said when he arrived, being known as a person who could solve big problems and who could help people with big problems, the staff was always so anxious to see him, and anybody that's been injured or hurt or is frustrated or feels undertrained or is struggling themselves or doesn't want to come to work, people that are care providers, people that are educators, and they feel like they don't have what they need and they don't feel successful. Of course, they are very desperate. They may feel as desperate as the person that they're supporting. And so he would be coming in and they couldn't wait to talk to him. And he said, sometimes I couldn't even get my coat off. And people would be saying to me, look at what this person did to me, and he bit me, and this person scratched me, and he punched me. And they really wanted to talk to, Herb as a mental health professional about everything that had happened. And he said, it wasn't that I was disinterested, but they were kind of trying to put the cart before the horse and tell me about the behavior. And I remember him talking a lot about how that was really hard to do. And so he said he would try to get people around the table and he'd say, I want to hear everything that's happening, but I first want to start with a very kind of a simple question. And that is, who loves this person? And he remarked that oftentimes with adults who had very severe behaviors that had lived in institutions or group homes, and again, depending on their services had been provided and they were missing family connections, sometimes, if not most of the time, the answer was nobody. And that was, that story had such an impact on me. But I think about people in prison. I think about any marginalized population. When you do not have a connection, when you do not feel that people around you want you to be successful and care about you and have your best interests at heart, how is it possible to bring out your best behavior? And so that's a very dramatic story to kind of open up this idea that it's so important to relationship build. Teachers sometimes ask me, well, what if at school he's a hard kid to like and we don't see that we have a lot of affection for a particular child? And my answer to that is, we want to make sure that, for any student in our school, there's always going to be students that, we just don't have a chemistry with them. But you may not love every student, but it shouldn't be easy to tell. And sometimes I feel like you can feel it when you walk in the room. So we want to make sure that not only are we really honest with ourselves and with our colleagues, but if I'm not a person that has a connection with this kid, then let's make sure that he has connections with lots of teachers in our school so we can find him some chemistry with some of our staff members. And we want to make sure that he's with paraprofessionals, he's with therapists who, a wide range of folks, that he has more than one person in his life who's really in his corner and has that kind of a chemistry. So really think about that relationship building. And sometimes this will take the form of actual strategies. So I like to introduce relationship building by that. Sometimes, I put in air quotes inappropriately, so she had some of those movement problems. She often scared people because she would take off at the Kmart, or she would try to, if she was on the bus, she would stand up and run down the aisle of the bus and, do things that would scare some care providers. Well, she got a new paraprofessional at the school, and this person, whose name is Gail, was responsible for taking her to the job site one day. And she did have some training from the teacher, but not maybe enough training. So after a couple of days taking Emily to work, she kind of balked and said, she was very nervous and she didn't know if she wanted to do this anymore. You have to keep working with Emily, or was there somebody else she could work with? And the teacher was really good and basically said, I think there's real potential for you guys to connect, but I think you need more support. So I've been working with the school, and so I got assigned to sort of eavesdrop on their interaction and go on the bus with them and things like that. And so I realized they didn't really have a relationship. And Emily was 19 at the time, still receiving services. So I told Gail, you could talk to her because, she's an adult. You're not in a classroom. You can sort of let her know about yourself. It's more appropriate to kind of develop, a sort of just might say, one that feels a little bit more informal than you might have in school or in a classroom. And so I sat in the back of the bus and I watched the two of them interact. And Emily did did have some interesting behaviors during that ride. I did see her popping up and down, and she was vocalizing a little bit. And the whole time I could see Gail, and I could hear Gail doing exactly what I told her to do. That was talk to her, establish this relationship. And so she's kind of just, saying a lot of things. She's talking, she's saying, um, Emily, can you sit down? Can you sit down? Can you, Emily? No, no. Can you actually, Emily? Can you sit? Emily, why don't you listen? Open your book. Wait, Emily, open your book. Can you sit down? Emily, you're gonna have to sit down. Now sit down. I would like you to check your schedule. Let's check your schedule. Let's see what you're gonna do today. Let's see what's on the schedule. Okay, the first thing, Emily, you gotta sit down. Emily, you gotta sit down. Let's look at your schedule. Let's check your schedule. Very first thing you're gonna do today is when you get there is you're gonna fold some towels. You gotta first go get your towels from the laundry, and then you're gonna, Emily, you got to sit down. You got to sit down. Sit, 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 sit. So she's, and this is exactly what I've told her to do, is to talk. But I guess it wasn't clear enough because the talk was really about directing Emily in this very specific way, but very little about establishing a connection. So when we got off the bus, I said, we got back to school eventually, and I said, I was thinking is you could talk to her a bit more. She said, oh, I thought I was doing that. And I said, well, yes, you were talking, but I said, what I mean is, could you just tell her a little bit about yourself? Hey, I only was a paraprofessional one other time, and at that point I worked in a middle school, and the reason I have this job is because of this, and, I really enjoy young people, and, just kind of fill her in. She doesn't know you, and so why would she all of a sudden show up for this person she doesn't really know? And so she said, okay, I know what you're saying. And I said, okay. And she said, but I think that will be really hard. And I said, why do you think that? And she said, because she said, I'm just being really honest. I think it's going to be really hard to talk to somebody who doesn't talk back. And I thought that was really honest. And I thought it was very brave of her to say it. And I said, I understand what you're saying. I know that's hard for some people. Subsequently found out in brainstorming ideas for this team was that Gail was a big scrapbook fan. She had tons of scrapbooks, and so she actually sold scrapbooking materials for her side job. So I had her bring in some of her favorite scrapbooks, and she used the scrapbooks as a starting place for having conversations with Emily. So she would bring it on the bus, and from the get-go, according to Gail, Emily was rapt. Gail, instead of saying, check your schedule, opened the book and started telling stories about her family and her background and places that she had been. And Emily just sat, apparently, from the second bus right on, almost problem-free, quiet as a mouse, just staring at those scrapbooks. And it was so effective that they really formed a connection. I think for Gail, it was very satisfying because, you make all these beautiful products, these art pieces, and not everybody wants to stare at your scrapbooks forever, but it was so nice that Emily did like them. And so eventually that morphed into Gail making a scrapbook with Em that she could take to work that was all about Emily. So when people asked questions about Emily could show her scrapbook. And I could go on and on. There were all kinds of benefits of that one little product. But I share that story because it would have been so easy to give her some kind of a checklist or give her a behavior plan and say every time she sits for 5 minutes she can have a reward, or there's all kinds of things we could have done. But that Gail was so savvy and apparently such an interesting person, and obviously a very nice person. And quite frankly, she must have been a very good support person because they really forged such a nice connection across that year. And what I think is really nice about this is that the behavior support was a scrapbook. And so how do we help people, strengthen those relationships? And I'll say one more thing about this. Sometimes it's not about the relationship between the staff and the students. Sometimes it could be about the relationship that we have with families. So my colleague Patrick Schwartz is very fond of saying parents are the gold standard or families are the gold standard. And it breaks my heart when I see that we don't always honor the knowledge that families have. And so in the beginning of the year, I always found if things weren't going well, I would do a second home visit. I usually did one in the beginning of the year, but around about like if we were doing report cards or, at IEP time, I would try to say, can I come over? Have a coffee at your house? You want to meet out for a coffee? And just try to build those relationships so that I thought parents would have so many wonderful suggestions around behavior. And here's somebody that's with this person more hours than I could ever possibly log with this child. And certainly they have expertise that they could feed into these questions that I have. So relationships are not just about the individual. And then finally, I'll say, you also want to think about relationships between students so that if students, one of the reasons I see students don't act, their best is because they don't have any connections in a classroom. And so when people say, well, it's really hard, I'll notice that the child, he's not included very much. And there's a reason this seminar, this workshop is on inclusion, because I think one of the ways that we can solve some of these behavior issues is to get kids not leaving the classroom when we're frustrated, but find more successful opportunities for the person. If he's really great when he's playing video games, then maybe there's some extracurricular or club idea that we could form. In one school I worked in, I had a kid who just loved Star Wars. He liked the memorabilia. He liked talking about the conventions, even though he had never been to one. He liked watching the movies. So we formed a little Star Wars club at the school so that he could share that interest with other kids. For younger kids, that might just be that having more focused games. So one of the things I've done at schools is I've helped some teachers even learn old classroom games. Like, for example, there is a right way to play Foursquare, and there's a right way to play tetherball, and there's a right way to play hopscotch. And so some kids with disabilities, they feel much more satisfied when they learn some of these discrete rules. And once they know the rules and other kids are enlisted to join, you can find kids are much more likely to join structured activities when there's lots of possibilities, lots of things to play, and lots of potential mates that would want to try some of those other games and activities. So anyway, that one can be explored from lots of angles, but if it's not one that you've thought about lately as a way to approach behavior, definitely, that might be one that you want to take a look at. Okay. So number 2 is similar. And the reason I'm starting with these is you might remember all the way back to the very first webinar, I was showing pictures of my newborn baby, and I was saying, when people loved her and when she had good curriculum, and I used my own textbook as an example of this, I said that, you have to have relationships, and I gave the example of her with her granny, and then you have to have things that you care about. You have to have curriculum. And I talked about being comfortable, and that's something we talked about last week with sensory, but and movement. But this was one of the top 3 that we talked about, and that is you have to provide support related to learning. And I think a lot of colleagues, a lot of my clients, I should say, are really kind of flabbergasted when I come in to talk about behavior and I want to talk about relationships and curriculum. They're usually not the first 2 questions that people ask. Like, what do the relationships look like and what's he doing all day? Because a lot of folks, and I want to see how is he spending his time, because one of the questions I always ask myself as an ally is, would you get me to do that thing all day? Would I sit at a table and do that all day by myself? Or would I engage in repetitive work like that day after day? Or would I be able to sit for 20 minutes without, any kind of action or any kind of novelty? And so that's why I say check the curriculum. And again, this is what it is. I feel like, general ed teachers are acutely aware of how important curriculum and instruction, behavior support, and I don't mean that special ed teachers that we aren't, but I just feel that because they have 30 kids or 20, lots of different kids, that they have to constantly keep mindful of how to keep 27 students engaged throughout the day, so that there's a whole host of structures in place, and there's different kinds of lesson formats, and so there's a lot going on there that we can sort of tap into as behavior support. So we want to say, is the work, is it motivating? Is it interesting? Is it appropriately challenging for the person? I remember, I'll never forget this little kid I saw. He was about a first grader, and he was included for this phonics little lesson. He was included for language arts. And the teachers were saying stuff like, wow, they thought he was really smart. They kept saying that, which was really cool. Like, they really saw him, but they just didn't really know what to do with him. And he couldn't really hold a pencil at all, at least well or easily. And all the kids would do these phonics exercises every day. So for like about 10 minutes or 12 minutes, you could have a partner, you could work on you could sit, in your chair. You could sit at a table. You could use a dry erase board. You could use a mini chalkboard. You could use a computer. And the kids, they would listen to these sounds, and they would write these words, and they would write rhyming words and make little stories and stuff like that. So everybody was doing that. This little guy stayed at a table, and they brought him over some letter blocks, like some baby blocks, And I said, why do you give him this instead of him doing that? And they said, well, he really can't write or draw, and so it's harder for him to do these exercises. We don't know what he knows anyway, and so because his production is low and it's hard for him to respond, even if he could use some kind of an adaptation to actually respond, it probably would take him so long anyway. It might be frustrating. So we just give him these blocks, and then we try to have him point to what the sound is, because they had letters on them. And the problem was, he kept clearing the table. He kept taking his arm and wiping the blocks on the floor. And, I think they were very good teachers. Like, they said, we think he's frustrated. I said, I think because everybody else has all these other materials. They have all these choices that they can make. They can do all these things. They're socially connected. So many of us would not want to have that much time with adult support. And I'm going to talk about that in our webinar here in just a minute. But it can be incredibly stressful to have all kinds of one-on-one and two-on-two and whatever support. And so I was saying, I think he's showing you he doesn't want those materials. And that would suggest to me he may want the materials that they're using. And they were very open. They said, yeah. And I said, what if he actually does know the answers to these, but pointing to the blocks is just as hard for him as other things? Like, he might not have a great pointing response. Maybe it would be better not to worry so much about his production during this, but just let him sit by a partner and watch the exercise so he can get the input. Or potentially, if he can point to something, he could just point to what they're doing. Or maybe he can circle it after they write the word or something. So we talked about things. They were very open. And I said, he's probably brighter than you think he is, but because his production in both writing and speaking is so low, it's hard. And one teacher said to the other, I think you're right. I think he is a lot smarter than we think. And the speech path said to her, yeah, remember last week? And they both looked at each other with this kind of like, like this glance. And I said, what happened last week? And they said, well, we left him alone with the blocks. And he looked really mad, but when we came back, he had spelled Toyota car with the blocks. And I swear, I did not know whether to laugh or cry because I thought, here is this kid. Like, and once they said it, they were like, they got it. They were like, yeah, he probably is pretty bright. Um, but it's those moments where we say these kids are doing everything but spelling out SOS. I mean, I thought this way of providing his daily instruction is not powerful enough. So one of the things I talk with teachers a lot about is maybe it's not challenging enough. And what a lot of teachers do is they make it less complex. Another example is a teacher, a principal, who I was watching a kid, and he did have some behaviors, but he was all by himself in a room down a hallway, no other kids around, one-on-one, doing flashcards for God knows how long during the day. And I said, this is socially disconnected. There's nothing novel about it. He's with one adult, sometimes two in the classroom. I wouldn't do this all day, especially when I'm his age, third grade, whatever it is. And I said, he did do some of the cards right until he started kicking this person. But I said, I think he's really bored. I think he's really frustrated. I think he's lonely. And then the principal said, well, it's really hard to bring him out because he does these things. And so I understood, we're trying to unpack it. But I said, do you think the flashcards that he's going through every day, are those too hard for him maybe? He got some of them right that I saw, but I was just brainstorming, saying, okay, what could be wrong? And the principal said, they're not too hard for him. In fact, he knows every single one of those words. And again, I thought, if he knows every single one of those words, why is that in his curriculum? Why is that part of his instruction every day if he knows it? And so no wonder the kid is frustrated. And so that's the kind of thing that I see a lot, is that it's just not stimulating enough, and kids find a hard time holding it together when and the experience of learning does very little to make them feel sort of connected and part of variety. If you're appealing, and that's again where I think that it's really, um, you know, environments, because it's the name of the game in general ed to not have our curriculum driven by just one document like the IEP, but lots of different experiences will be available. So therefore, things that we might not have targeted for a couple of kids may be available. We may see that a child has an interest in or penchant for something that we might not have offered. So if kids are doing the same kinds of things every day based on maybe IEP objectives, that means that they're practicing things every single day that are really challenging for them, things that maybe aren't their sweet spot, so to speak. So really looking and making sure that their day and their week is rich enough. And again, when you think about what you'd be willing to do all day, what would interest you? Beware of curriculum that is not age appropriate. So when students are, working with materials, or they're reading a book that is for a younger child. I can remember reading, again, I've been doing a lot of these lately. I was just telling a story to a group of literacy teachers about a kid that, had no interest. They said, well, we read to him, but he eats the books or he throws the books. But they were reading him, Clifford the Red Dog, and they were reading him these books for, much younger children. But when we gave him literature that was age appropriate, he was much more interested. And the teacher had actually been pulling him out at times of general ed to read him one-on-one because his eye contact was not very good with the teacher. I explained to her that a lot of when they're listening, because it's hard for them to make eye contact and listen at the same time. So that a lot of kids in a read aloud, for instance, will look down as a tool that supports their own listening. And so she was, leery of letting him sit there and listen to the grade level, book that the teacher is reading. But she found that once she gave him a little seating support, and once she put him by preferred peer, he was able to sit for long periods of time and would attend in his own way, if not visually. So making sure that it's very much age appropriate. I remember meeting a speech path at one point who was giving her students, who said to me, like, I really want to go with his fascination, his interest, which is, what was it? Water. She liked water. He was a tactile person. And she said, but I can't get him to engage in the activity in the way that I want him to, because then he won't leave the water. I said, well, what's the activity? And I said, she said, well, I have these little sponges, and so I've made the sponge activity for him because he likes water. And then I get the sponges wet, and then I have him sort these sponges by color or shape or something. And then I said, well, and she said, and then he doesn't want to do it because he just stays with the water. And I said, well, how old is he? And he was like 11 or something. And I thought, well, I'd rather play with water too. Like it's wholly inappropriate for somebody his age. We want to look at what a kid his age would be doing. What materials should we use? How is this connected to anything else that a kid his age would learn? How is it meaningful? How is it motivating in any way? How is it, has he seen anybody else engage in this kind of activity? So really think about what's appropriate for this person and developmentally, but what's important for this person, for some of his chronological age. How about instruction that's a poor match for the person's learning style? So I see sometimes, somebody's asked to do a lot of written work and kids just melt down. I saw this kid once and they said, well, he wants to do everything on the iPad and he can't do that. And so then he just melts down. And but writing for him him writing on a worksheet was really hard for him. And as one kid told me, not that kid, but every time I write something, it's like I'm carving something out of stone, that the motor planning was so overwhelming. So I said, what would it feel like to you if you just let him do the work on the iPad? And that was hard because they had always viewed the iPad as a reward. And I said, the iPad is it's an accommodation for him. It actually helps him perform. And so we had to make some decisions about how he could do that without maybe visiting favorite sites or apps or things like that. But he worked for a longer period of time and was much less resistant when he didn't have to engage in the handwriting piece of it. Not enough opportunities for communication, conversation, and choice making. The day should have that kind of variety. If you are only bringing out a child's communication system so that he can choose a snack, or tell you what he had for lunch, that's a problem. So there should be plenty of opportunities for kids to use their, to make choices, to talk to other folks. If they have augmentative communication, we should be seeing that throughout the lessons, not just opportunities. I see a lot with AugCom, which would be a communication system or communication tools. I see a lot of times we use the communication to assess kids. So in other words, we'll ask them, can you show me a living thing? But we should be using augmentative communication throughout the whole lesson. So let's actually identify a bunch of living things here. And so we're together coactively, more than one child is identifying living things. Maybe the teacher is using some board maker symbols to identify living things, but we're making sure that it's not just about assessing with a couple of questions, and that kids are connecting and having access to not just this interesting material, but their voices through a whole lesson. We want to be aware also of not enough social interaction in the day, and I talked a little bit about that, but also not enough fun or joy. So what does the day feel like to a child? And, when I think about how I viewed school, it's like every day isn't a circus and every day isn't, tons of fun, but you want to have a lot to look forward to, and you want to make sure that there's laughter in your day, and there's some times when you get to have secrets and connect and stories, and that your peers are around you, and there's games. And so what does this look like for certain students with disabilities? So that's another big area that we want to really look at. And it's a great strategy to tackle and say, I really want to look at curriculum and changing this person's curriculum as a way to change some of the behavior. So if you've got a kid who struggles mightily in one area of the day, look at what he's expected to learn and how he's expected to learn it. With that, hand in hand, I like talking about this idea number 3, which is evaluate your expectations. And this is a biggie. I talk a lot in one of the other webinars I did for this group, I talked about proximal support, and this is sort of an offshoot of that. So if you've ever heard me talk about this before, you might have heard me talk about it in the context of really look at not just evaluating your expectations, but evaluate what the support looks like for students. And then along with that, what do your expectations look and feel like? For instance, when I know a lot of students that have a lot of physical support. So they always have a one-on-one, a paraprofessional. They have therapists around them. Sometimes there's two, maybe there's a teacher teaching, and then they have a paraprofessional sitting next to them in a self-contained classroom. So it's like 2 teachers and 2 kids or something. think about what that feels like to a kid. I give seminars a lot, or, different districts. And one of the ways I couch this with teachers is I say, we'll play games in my seminar, and I'll go off on tangents like I am now and tell stories, and I'll show them film, and I'll sometimes be on a soapbox, but it's like 6 hours of workshop. And if you've been in a workshop as a parent or a teacher, it can be a lot. I mean, like by the end of it, you're kind of like tired just from sitting and listening, right? And there's a lot of demands that are unusual. But I sometimes ask people, how would this day have felt different to you if I had provided all the information one-on-one? And people kind of laugh at that. And I say, how many of you would have preferred this workshop delivered one-on-one? And there's always 2 people in 100 that raise their hand, and they'll say, I just like the material, or I'd love to talk to you more. And I don't think they're lying. I think that, there's some people that would like that, but the other 98 are snickering and laughing because they're not sure why that's true, but they're like, no, I wouldn't want to just have one-on-one. I liked being in a group. I liked being able to, text if I needed to, and maybe make a little grocery list over here if I was drifting off for a little bit, and take a fake bathroom break or a real bathroom break when I needed to. And maybe I couldn't be 100%, on target at every minute, but, in 6 hours, that's okay. And so I always laugh about that. And I say, yeah, I've taught almost every grade level. And what I always say is I think that about 85% of time on task, if you will, is about right. So when I have audiences, if I have participants, if I have a group that I feel like is really, boy, they're out of it and they're not with me, and there's people that are, maybe about half the time I've got their attention, I'm really worried about my teaching. But if I have most of the participants there for most of the time, and I say, there's a couple of bathroom breaks here and there, and I can see maybe, hey, someone's making a list or grading a little bit here and there, as long as they're with me 85%, I think that's about what a human being can do in 6 hours or 7 hours. It's a lot to sit and get for a long period of time. And it's my job as a teacher to make it as, appealing as possible, but we're still humans. And when I ask the audiences, I say, when you were in school, K-12, I said, think about any high school class, good or bad, but even your best classes, I say, what percentage of time were you on task? And people say everything from 10% to 80% to, 5%, and sometimes 90%, but nobody, I mean, it's so rare that somebody says 100%. And most people say, yeah, my best classes, I did pretty good. I would be there at 80%, something like that. But yeah, I would mess around a little bit, and I would sometimes take a fake bathroom break, and I would visit with my friends. And so I think about that. Thank goodness that our teachers really evaluated expectations, right? And that they thought to themselves, because I mean, I'm right with you. Even in my best classes, maybe I'm there, keyed in about 85% or so. I didn't get, called out for every little time I turned around and talked to my neighbor. I didn't get called out. Sometimes if I took an extra break, I was a pretty good student, so they probably didn't think I was running off to the ladies' room every time, authentically. But you're cut some slack if for most of the time you're hanging in there. And I think we are cut more slack as individuals without disabilities than most kids with disabilities ever are. So I have this little checklist here on this page, and I want you to think about this idea of the checklist. Now, I'm sure a lot of you can relate to this. If I said to you, have you ever seen anybody with a checklist that, a behavior checklist that's in 15-minute increments? I'm sure, most of you would say, I've seen it. I've had audiences, I don't know, maybe some of you, I don't know if you want to type in the Q&A if you want to. I could see that those comments. But if you've seen a checklist that's every 10 minutes or every 5 minutes or something like that, I'm sure people have seen these. And, when I think about that, I think about my own learning in one of these, seminars or something. How unusual it would be for somebody, even an adult learner who's really trying hard to be on, every minute. And I think that when we give a kid every 5 minutes, and when we're assessing them every 10 minutes, every 15 minutes, and then we're giving them a reward if they actually have so many of these in the day, what we are really saying to a kid is, I expect you to be on task 100% of the time. Because you're going to get, if I'm going to assess every single one of these, I'm not going to skip 2 of them. I'm going to assess 8 to 8:15 and 8:15 to 8:30 and 8:30 to, then my hope and goal for you as a teacher, of course, you'd have a smiley face every time, meaning that I'm looking for, you know, you hanging in there all day long. And when you get smile, 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 you're going to get all kinds of thumbs up and gold stars about that. But I think we need to think about what it means to be a human being. I just think that's not a very healthy message to send to a human being. And I think it actually creates behaviors instead of supports behaviors. And I'm going to tell you a little story about the snake table here that might help to drive this point home a bit. I was in a classroom and they had a couple of kids sitting around doing journal pages. So it was kindergarten and the kids would do a sentence and then they would draw a little picture and things like that. And then if they could embellish and if they could add details, they did that. But they was pretty early in the year. And there was a little gal in that class with Down syndrome, and she was pretty new to being included. And I thought she was doing a pretty good job, but she had a lot of people in there looking at her, and it was new, in this school year. I was in there visiting. There was an OT in there trying to set her up and get her some materials that she could write with. Her teacher, special ed teacher, was in there, and they were kind of crowded around her and sitting her up on the table, and she wrote something on her page, and they said, okay, now you can use a stamp or a sticker and you can add to that picture. And so she did that. And after about 10 minutes of this, she started kind of sliding down in her chair, and she looked kind of done to me, but she had done what they had asked. But because they were still available to work with her, they were kind of, okay, now stamp your name on the page. And she did that. And then they were giving her more input and she was doing that. But you could tell she was really antsy and uncomfortable. And she started vocalizing a little bit. And I thought, well, she's been doing this a long time. And I looked over to this group of 5 boys, and they were at this table, and they were all writing sentences about snakes. And it's like kindergarten boys are like that, right? Or kindergarten kids. One kid writes about, the swamp, and then the next kid writes about the swamp, and then you write about a snake, and pretty soon everyone's writing the same kind of thing, and they're all into snakes, right, at this point in their lives. And so they're all doing, and after it's been 10 minutes, and they all have a nice drawing on their page, but now it's been about 10, 12 minutes, and they only journal for like 15 minutes, I think. So all of these boys were now underneath the table wriggling around like snakes. Now, this kindergarten teacher doesn't see them because her eyes are on this other situation with this young lady with Down syndrome. And so you've got a kid with Down syndrome who probably has the messiest body in the classroom, and she's sitting straight up in her chair with proper form. She's got a more complex journal page than probably anybody in the classroom, because she's getting all these cues and all these reminders to keep going, and she's errorless in her work, which means she has a period and she has a capital letter. Nobody else is working from that point of errorless writing. At that point, they're expressing themselves, they're using inventive spelling, so all the standards are different for her. And I look over at all these wriggling boys, and the kindergarten teacher turns to them and says, okay, guys, about, 1 more minute, and then you got to come back up and join us. She, as a kindergarten teacher early in the school year, kind of was saying to them, yeah, you probably need a little wiggle time right now. You've been sitting for a long time. You can be a snake. You could dramatically, act out those sentences for a minute and then come on and transition. She was in no way reprimanding them for that. But I thought, look at that double standard of one kid who's got to sit perfectly because there's a lot of eyes on her. And I'm kind of picking on this team, for no good reason, because it was the beginning of the year and they happened to be there at that time. But I do think we see that a lot, where the expectations are very different for students with disabilities potentially than they are for students with the most needs in the classroom. So be really careful about time on task. Be really careful about giving kids too many cues, too much proximal support. I have seen this time and time again cause negative behaviors. And so when I see a kid that is always getting all these cues and intrusion and stand up and sit back down again, put your name there, I say, if you want better behavior inside this inclusive classroom, you need to give less proximal support, and you need to look for check-in supports, and for kids to give supports, and for that general educator to give cues, and for your paraprofessional to work more in a classroom setting and have responsibilities in more indirect ways, or even if it's just check-in supports, or at the very least, if they have to be providing more proximal support, tone down a lot of the verbal cues and be a little bit, be as only as intrusive as necessary. And I feel for a lot of our paraprofessionals, because I think sometimes they just don't know what to do because they're not given enough training or cues. And so they feel like they're not doing their job if they're not whispering in the student's ear. So really think about those expectations. If that's one that really hits for you and you think that's content you can bring back, maybe that's one of your 2 or 3 recommendations that you can take away today. All right, this is a shorter one. I just wanted to give a little commercial for giving real choices. And you might remember that I mentioned in the very first seminar or webinar that kids are sometimes, we tell them that, oh, we're giving you choices, but we don't give them real choices. And so this is probably incredibly frustrating. So we say things like, you can either sit here and fuss, or you can sit here on the floor and embarrass yourself, or you can get up right now and meet me in Mrs. K's office. So both of these choices are bad, because Mrs. K's office is going to be where I'm going to get the consequences, and this is kind of the heavy, or staying here and embarrassing myself. That's not a real choice. So a real choice, as I said last time, might giving the person an opportunity to, we should probably go and talk to somebody to help you calm down. Would you like to talk to Mrs. S or Mrs. K? Or would you like to go and do some deep breathing right now? Or would you like to go and do some video mantras? Potentially before you have to talk consequences, but you're actually giving a real choice. And so I talked a little bit about that from a crisis perspective. But in general, in a child's day, we want to make sure that there are lots of choices, so that a person that feels like they don't have a lot of agency and control in their life can get some back. So again, I talked about having communication throughout the day. This goes hand in hand with giving kids plenty of communication support. So they just, even choices from, we're making an art project, and what color do you want to use, and making sure that they can talk about, what colors that they want to use, what choices they want to make next, who they want to work with. On the left is a little ring of pictures of kids in a kindergarten classroom, so that this young lady, could actually, this is Amy, so she could make choices about who she wanted to work with. She used this ring to learn students' names. She could use this to pick somebody to actually group kids, so that she could work with the teacher to group kids and make choices like that. She could learn about other kinds of choices that she could make. So if you see on those little gingerbread guys, it says, my hobbies, my favorite color. So if you have a kid that's not making a wide range of choices, and you say, well, they have really immature interests, and they don't really know what to do on the playground, and they keep doing the same things, so now they can see what other kids are interested in, and that can help to sort of widen the potential choices that they might make, or interests that they might have, or games that they might want to engage in. And finally, there in the right corner, in the right lower corner, is something from my latest, what book is that from? I think that's from a book I did called Text Maps and Memory Caps. And it's just, that book is just kind of full of all kinds of, I say, dollar store differentiation ideas, just 100 pictures of different things you can make for the classroom that all help you to universally design or differentiate. And we put this in as, this individual agenda. It's something that you can provide in inclusive classrooms in general. And you might just use this to give all kids control and support, for that sense of agency. So you take a segment of the school day, and maybe that's just, a half an hour or an hour, and maybe that's, science, and you tell kids, here are a bunch of things that need to get done this week. Every single day this week in science, you get to pick what you want to do. So kids get to sign up, and the teacher has to sign off, but they get to say things like, I'm going to work on my science fair project. And then the next segment of time, I'm going to do some independent reading. And the last segment, I'm going to work with a partner, and we are going to complete 2 pages of the packet. So you'll let them know there's certain things that need to get done, but all the kids get to work on setting goals, managing time, and managing projects. So it's most appropriate probably in late elementary, middle school, and high school, but it's just another way to give some ideas. And if you homeschool, this is an idea, but to give kids some control back, because we do this, don't we? I like to do creative things in the morning, but I do not like doing anything creative in the afternoon because I'm kind of done. I like doing things that are more active a little bit later when I need a boost. There's certain times when I like to do reading. So it gives kids a little bit of a sense of, you're in the driver's seat when possible, and you should be. Okay. Number 5 is an oldie but a goodie. So now we're going into some of the more traditional kinds of things, right? So the last part of the presentation is, these are things that you would see in lots of textbooks. Using visuals, I'm going to talk about working with fascinations, but I'm going to kick it off by talking about narration or social stories. And this is a cartoon that I made. Now I'm going to give you a website to look at, but I don't want you to get mad at me because you may lose hours of your life on this website. And it is a site from Marvel Comics. It's free, and you can make a cartoon like this in 2 minutes. And I think it looks beautiful, and any kid that loves comics, a lot of the favorite characters are available out there. It's really neat. But it's also a great tool for things like creating social narratives or social stories. It's great for letting kids just write stories in general and finding motivation. But I'm putting it here because I used it for a kid who really loves Marvel Comics. And so we did all kinds of picture directions and social stories for this kid. And so here we have, I don't know who this character is, but saying, I guess I should find an open computer station. And then that's right, Britt, that's what I did. Should I sign on first or get my lab book? Definitely sign in first. Look at Mrs. Help's rules if you get confused. So this is what we're talking about, is like when you hear about social stories or social narratives, they don't have to take the traditional form that we know, where it's maybe a 4-paragraph story, although I'm going to show you all of that. But if you want to just do a quick social narrative, you might be able to just do it in pictures, even with stick figures, and even using some characters that students really care about. So I have my social little narrative here, my little cartoon that's sort of about rule following, but you could make one about helping kids deal with their challenges. So for example, if you're trying to teach somebody some of the skills that we talked about last week, such as deep breathing, or you're trying to teach them how to do a meditation, you could talk them through that using a little narrative like this, and maybe even using pictures, stick figures, or even Marvel cartoon characters. So again, just go to the Marvel website, marvel.com, and there's a make your own comic section, and it is so much fun. Again, you can make a whole comic book or just a strip, and you will lose potentially hours of your life if you think it's as cool as I do. But anyway, I just wanted to show you that kind of neat picture. And now I want to show you some really great resources, because if you've never been to Carol's site directly, you're missing out. I want to tell you something about Carol Gray's social stories. The social story literature really begins with Carol, and she has trademarked social stories. So technically, legally, when you see social stories, it should have that little trademark on it, because she's sort of the grandmother, if you will, of this more formal way of thinking about social stories. And the website is full of so many wonderful tools. So I'm going to show you that. And again, I'm veering off a little bit, so hopefully I do this with some grace. Hopefully you're seeing the website now. This is Carol's site. It's Carol Gray, and it's Gray with an A. Just always remember that. And it kind of rhymes, Gray with an A. CarolGraySocialStories.com. And I want to show you part of the website that every educator and parent should know about. First of all, I think the whole website is absolutely beautiful, and it's chock full of free materials. So you want to head here. What is a social story? Historical context of autism and social stories, her philosophy, the philosophy. But the part that I wanted to show you was the social story sampler. And so she talks about here that, you know, some social stories are really challenging to figure out. And so she gives templates. And what's really nice about this is not only does she have these nice templates that you can use and pass to other people, but they give you a really good grounding for what it should look like to write your own. And so you can't get a better teacher, in my opinion, than Carol Gray. And so here she is giving you these free products. So I'm going to take you down here and show you. These are some of the stories that are kind of unusual that she wants to share with all of us and make sure that we have all the tools that we need for all kinds of tricky situations. One that I've just recently been sharing with people is this one, watching a tragedy on television. We have had all these tragedies happen in our country, and I don't know if you've noticed, but a lot of kids with disabilities, kids on the autism spectrum, it doesn't have to happen to them for them to feel severe anxiety, does it? So I'm going to show you the social story, watching a tragedy on television, and you can see she's got these beautiful color images, and you have this narrative. And so if you have never seen a social story before, and that may be true for some of you, you'll notice that it's taking the individual through an event. It's using language to help them understand a novel experience. It may also be used to help somebody take action, like learn a skill or take a risk, or just maybe to understand something. And you'll notice the language. This is written from the perspective of the child. I may learn about a tragedy when I am watching television. And so that's a true social story, is you've got that child's perspective. When there is a tragedy, sometimes there's a news bulletin. This means my show will stop suddenly and a newscast will come on. Many children find it's easier to learn about a tragedy with an adult. Adults have lived a long time. They have seen a few tragedies on television and can answer questions. Talking with adults helps many children feel less confused and more comfortable again. So you can go to this. I'm not going to go on, but you can see about the length of it. You don't have to use the pictures. You can change it up. You can even add your own pictures. But you can see that just seeing the pattern of sentences that she uses and seeing where she's inserting the pictures and the voice that's, part of the story, that could really help a novice understand how to write one of their own. So definitely check this out. She's got so much material here. And again, if you've heard about social stories, but you don't quite know what they are, you can get everything here, and you're going to go right to, there's all kinds of things. The newsletters are great. The articles are great too. But it would be really nice and, for you to maybe catch up in this section as well, which is all about the social story. So anyway, check that out. If you've never used them, give this one a try. I would say if you've never used a social narrative or you've maybe used social stories, but you haven't used the pictures, or you've never used a cartoon and those kinds of things, try some other version of it, because as you know, if you have used them, they can be incredibly effective, incredibly powerful for students, and really calming. And the idea is that it helps students later draw, when students don't have the stories in front of them, they can draw on the ideas a little bit later and really download and internalize that helpful information that's provided through the story. Another resource, a little caveat here, is Pinterest. So I know in giving you 10 strategies today, I can only kind of touch the surface. And so I decided to kind of just show you where you could get more. There are two places you can find more information in general if you're looking for physical supports for kids, actual products. And one of them is Teachers Pay Teachers. I may have mentioned that already, TPT, Teachers Pay Teachers. And you'll find a lot of visual supports, and you'll find some things like social narratives out there and things like that, but they may be a couple of dollars. But Pinterest is another place where you'll find a lot in this category of social stories. Now, I want to just say one thing. You see where this yellow square is on the slide here? It says free social stories. The other thing I'll say, if you're somebody that's sharing social stories and you're somebody that's doing presentations, just be aware, I'm not saying this because I work for Carol Gray or anything, but she has trademarked that product. And so when I see some of the pieces out here with the free social stories. I use the word social narrative on purpose because a narrative is something that you might craft a little bit differently than Carol's version. So you might, if you're going to actually be teaching this or sharing this, that's one recommendation I would have. And just talking about the tool is that it's generally accepted that a social narrative is something a little bit broader and can take a lot of forms, but that when you follow Carol Gray's formula, that's usually what a social story is. So just thought I'd throw that out there in case some of you want to take this back and present it somehow. That if you're looking for the real thing when it comes to a social story, you would probably want to look at the guidelines from Carol's site. All right, so moving along here, let's talk about my favorite thing. Maybe you've come to another, or you've listened to another Idaho a university presentation, and you have heard me talk about my book, Just Give Him the Whale. Well, that's what I want to do for a couple of minutes here. And I did a whole session on this at one point where I just talked about, using fascinations. It's something I've been studying for quite some time, at least 10 years now. And I always say, when we think about behavior, we want to start from where kids are strong. Look for the bright spots in the day. What is the kid, which 15-minute period, which hour do you never have problems? I had a kid who never ever struggled during music, and he loved the sound of the piano. And I kept saying, when he was in elementary school, I said, give him more than one opportunity to attend music. Let him go with other classes, not just his own class if possible, if that helps him to be his best self and helps him feel organized and calm. And when he got to middle school, I said, is there any reason we can't give him more than one music class? And he didn't have that forever, but he had that for the first semester of his middle school years because it was just such a powerful tool. So look for bright spots and try to mimic what's happening in those bright spots. The other thing is, think about fascinations. A lot of people, when they use fascinations, they use them as carrots. So if you do this, I'll give you time with this. I would like us today to focus more on using a fascination as a bridge or a stepping stone instead of as a carrot. So I want to say, if this really helps you, how can we use it powerfully to kind of, build in supports and bring you along? And specifically, how can we use it to have you take new risks, improve those behaviors? And what we're going to do is we're actually going to take that thing that the kid loves the most. We're not going to just let him sit here and, look at his magazines all day, his horsey magazines. I'm going to use horse magazines to create math books for him so that, this is one of my students actually, 2 ponies and 2 horses, that's 4. I'm going to use horses to actually create a little spelling tool for him in a little book with words that rhyme with horse. So I'm using it as a springboard. I'm not just going to say he can be with horses all day and look at horse magazines and he doesn't have to do anything. I'm going to say, I want him to learn these things. I'm going to use horses to teach him. So, so I want to read a book to you. I have a video of me reading my book, Pedro's Whale. And so I thought I would share that with you. That's not it. Let's see. Here it is. And it's, I thought I could get a little drink of tea here while you were listening to me read. And this is a video I shot a couple of years ago of me reading the book, and so I share some of the pictures in that here too. So you'll see me reading it, you'll see the pictures in the book, and as you're watching the film, a clip, what I want you to think about is, what was my point of writing this children's book? And who is my audience? So if I wrote a book called Just Give Him the Whale, which is 20 different ways to use a child's fascination to support him or her. But the book was successful, and people kept asking me about the title. Why is the title Just Give Him the Whale? I mean, they kind of got it, but I said, it's based on a story. And so I would tell them the story that was written in the preface, and they'd say, that would be a great children's book. So my colleague, Patrick Schwartz, and I said, hey, that would be a great kid's book. So this is the story, and it's actually based on a true story of a little guy here in Chicago Public Schools. So let's take a look.
Pedro's Whale. To every child and young adult who has a fascination that is not always shared by others, including but not limited to whales, steam engines, windshield wipers, weather, rubber bands, root beer bottles, belt buckles, garage doors, American Idol, sharks, license plates, pencil stubs, pre-1960s animation, poodles, world leaders, record players, the battles of Lexington and Concord, vacuum cleaners, Madagascar, tractors, bus schedules, lighthouses, robins, picket fences, Bing Crosby, and soup labels. More than anything in the world, Pedro loved whales. He loved big whales, he loved gray whales, he loved small whales, and he loved blue whales. But most of all, he loved his whale. It made him so happy. Pedro could not wait for the first day of school. He wanted to make pictures, sing songs, and show everyone his whale. He was very excited as he hung up his backpack, and he was very excited as he took out his whale to show his new friends. But when his teacher, Miss Tamayo, saw his beautiful, shiny, fits perfectly in a pocket whale, she smiled, held out her hand, and said, "Sorry, Pedro, no toys in class." Pedro gave Miss Tamayo the whale. Soon he felt a tear in his eye and then another, and he cried harder and harder and ducked under a table to hide. Just then Pedro's principal, Miss Gomez, came to the door and saw Pedro crying and crouching under the table. Miss Gomez asked Miss Tamayo, "What's wrong with Pedro?" Miss Tamayo whispered, "Pedro brought a toy to school and students are not allowed to play with toys in class." Miss Gomez said, "Pedro's new to our school and he may need a little extra comfort and support. What is it you want Pedro to do?" Miss Tamayo replied, "I want him to follow directions, sit with his classmates, and do his work." Miss Gomez smiled and explained, "New things are scary for Pedro. His whale helps him feel safe and do his best work. If you want Pedro to do his best work, you just need to give him his whale." Miss Tamayo walked over to Pedro holding the whale. Slowly he came out from under the table. She handed the toy back to him and said, "Miss Gomez told me your whale helps you learn. Is that right?" Pedro nodded and sniffled. "Then let's see how the whale can help us all." After that, Pedro got to keep the whale at calendar time. It helped him learn the days of the week and the months of the year. He got to keep it at story time. It helped him travel to faraway places. Of course, he got to keep it during science. It helped him learn about sinking and floating. He even got to keep it at recess. It helped him make new friends. Even Miss Tamayo used the whale now and then. But best of all, Pedro's classmates brought him pictures of whales to use for his cubby, and they even asked to go to the aquarium to see the new baby whale for their field trip. Pedro was very happy. He loved kindergarten. He loved his new teacher, his principal, his new friends, and of course, his whale.
Okay. So that, is a little bit of a story for kids, but my audience, our audience, was not primarily kids, and you might have guessed that already. So our audience was primarily adults. We wanted adults to feel like they had permission to teach differently and that it was okay to use fascinations and interests as bridges and not just as carrots. And so I'll always say, get rid of your point systems. Like if you look at the child's fascination and see, could we build this in enough where maybe he doesn't have to earn everything, and maybe we don't have to have the stress of assigning points and being, being tied into this system that can be frustrating for both players in it, really. And so we wanted folks to have a different, view on that. And so I think sometimes it feels like we don't have permission. And I want to share a story with you that's from not Pedro's whale, but from the book, from the textbook, Just Give Him the Whale. And again, this is 20 different ideas for supporting kids. So for example, one little tiny chapter, they're like 3-page chapters, but one is how to use a fascination to develop a relationship with a student, or how to use a fascination to expand somebody's social opportunities, or how to use a fascination to expand communication skills, or how to use a fascination to minimize anxiety, things like that. And so I was out talking about the book, and I was sharing it with audiences, and a mom came up to me and she said, I really didn't believe in this stuff. And she said, she saw me speaking, and she said, it kind of frustrated me that you were saying it, because it's not my philosophy, but what I'm doing isn't working. So I thought, all right, fine, I'll do it your way. So she went home, and she said she decided to go with the fascination instead of swimming against it, if you will. And she sent me, I'm going to read you an email that is actually published in the book. And I'm going to read you, it's in the Q&A section if you have the book. And she sent me this email, and it just meant so much to me. And when I read it in workshops, people are very, they're very emotional, because, to kind of see that when we give people time with their fascinations, we don't just give them an opportunity to kind of, as I said, move with the current, if you will, to keep using sea life analogies. But we also, I think, respect their hearts in a way. And as one child has said in a study on this topic, when my teacher lets me have airplanes, it's like it's my whole life. It's like he brings it's like him bringing himself to school. So here's the email she sent me. I have a son stuck on front-loading washers and dryers. Paula, I'm embarrassed to admit how much time is spent trying to distract him from the basement when the laundry's going. I've been contemplating putting a lock on the basement door, but he's taller and certainly smarter than I am, so what's the point? She went on to share that after attending the seminar, she came home and searched for this magazine that her son was dragging around the house. She thought it was an ad for maybe front-loading washing machines, but she was mistaken. It turns out it was a 5-page article on redecorating your laundry room. I started reading him the article, as I'm sure you're not surprised to hear he was thrilled. When I'm old and gray sitting in my rocker, I will remember this moment as one of my favorites. Then we pulled out all the pages so we could save them. We started talking about the sizes and colors of baskets, machines, and laundry accessories. Who knew? We even decided that when Grandpa returns from Florida next month, we will have him help us redecorate the laundry room. That upped the excitement quotient. Then I pulled my husband aside, and although he was very skeptical, I talked him into finding the owner's manuals and the DVD for the machine. My son was so thrilled you would have thought it was Christmas. No, let me correct that. He has never been as excited about a Christmas or birthday gift. So I'm planning to stop by Home Depot and Best Buy and get as many ads, brochures, and manuals as I can, and use a front-loading washing machine and dryer to teach every concept I can come up with. And that was just very emotional for me to see, because I think there's a lot of teachers too who just feel like they may not have permission to work in this way. However, I think the tides are changing, and we are seeing more enthusiasm about this. If you doubt that, you might want to look up a new film that was nominated for an Oscar this last year called Life Animated. Maybe you've seen some snips of this film on news programs, and it's about a young man who used Disney as a way to learn about nearly everything in life. So there's a book called Life Animated, and it's by his father, Ron Suskind, and the young man's name is Owen. And it's really a lovely story. So if you're trying to compel other people and you need more, you need data, you need story, you need narrative, check out Life Animated as well. Here are some examples, though, from my own work. The top left corner is a young man that needs a lot of coaxing, a lot of resistance to do work. So he's a kid in Wisconsin, and they made him a tree stand. I don't know if you all know what that is, but in Wisconsin, a lot of deer hunting. I'm not sure that happens a lot in Idaho, or what kind of hunting would happen. But if you have tree stands, that are a common thing. But this young man was a hunting fan, even though he never hunted, but his family hunted. So this is just a huge box covered in camouflage gift wrap. And that was enough for him. To him, that was a tree stand. And so he will do work in the classroom there when he, especially as independent reading or independent work, if he can go in his tree stand. That's an example of using a fascination. The left-hand corner is a young man who was resisting his homework, and the teacher was struggling with the relationship in general with him. And she said things turned around a lot when she gave him this gift. It was a little briefcase that she got at Goodwill for a couple of bucks. The young man loves James Bond, so she sends all of his homework home in a briefcase. And he was absolutely delighted by that gift. Doing math problems, little math. I found these Minecraft math cards for somebody who has a fascination around video games. That's on the bottom right is a Shutterfly book. You can go to Shutterfly or any of those publishing programs, and you can make a great looking social narrative book. You can make a great looking book of rules that connect to somebody's fascination. So I knew a kid that absolutely loved the Appalachian Trail, and so they made him a little book of rules for the classroom based on a journey, the journey of this classroom. And it talked about, kind of making the analogy of the journey and the trail of learning. And they made him this beautiful published book. We made an alphabet book for a little guy who we wanted to get into a little bit more complex reading opportunities, and he was kind of just paging through picture books at that point, and he wasn't doing any reading, but he liked his Wheel of Fortune book that we custom made for him. And then right in the middle, smack dab in the middle, is a little box that we created, and this is again from that Text Maps to Memory Caps, those little dollar store ideas from that book. In that book, we detail this little fascinations chest, and it's just teeny tiny that a teacher can keep in her desk, and a student can access this, or that you can put it in their locker. They can access their little, in this case, she liked horses, and she liked all four-legged animals like zebras and donkeys and horses. And so she would take items out, and when she felt like she could work without them, then she could put them back. But when she had big stress, she could go and she knew they were in the locker. Another young man that we write about loves cockroaches, and so his teacher had a little plastic cockroach in her desk, and when he felt super stressed out and was really having a hard day, he knew he could come and get the pocket roach, as we called it, and he'd take this plastic roach and he'd put it in his pocket, and on the bottom of the roach, with a piece of tape, the teacher had written, "I will survive." And she told him that cockroaches can survive anything, and she said, "Mason, you can too." And she told him about resilience, and I thought that was just as sweet as can be. I'm going to show you a little video. This is a DVD kit that I put together about 6 or 7 years ago now. I made as you know, a lot of this material is based on my book, and the book is called You're Going to Love This Kid, and it's about autism and inclusion and support. And after the book was out a couple of years, I wanted to make a DVD, like a professional development kit to go with it, because I thought, well, I'm always going on and chit-chatting and talking, but I want people to actually see the wonderful teachers I get to work with. So you're going to see in this video a parent talking about a fascination and a teacher talking about a challenge that they overcame in a school related to kind of what you might call a perseverative behavior. Let's take a look.
The third piece of the autism definition is what some would call obsessions, what I like to call fascinations. In this category, we're thinking about some of the struggles that kids may have with repetitive movements. In this category, we're also looking at kids having repetitive thoughts or language, and we're also thinking about kids having collections and even intense fascinations. So this is where you would see kids who would love dolphins, or kids who love garage doors, or kids who love dead-end streets or vacuum cleaners. Some of the ways that teachers can be thinking about this area is to find out what those passions and interests are, and to use those repetitive thoughts and ideas when they can, and also provide comfort and support for times when those repetitive thoughts, ideas are challenging for kids.
My book is about giraffes. My book is about giraffes. Giraffes have long necks.
You can say, it's about you, not about giraffes.
I like giraffes. I like giraffes.
I think that when you're thinking about kids with autism and how you want to set them up for success, you really want to first redo a parent inventory in the beginning of the year, finding out what are things that they really like, what are their favorite, snacks, what are their favorite activities, and then really trying to build some of those things in as naturally as you can within the classroom. He's really into maps, and so in third grade, he would always want to come over and kind of walk around the map. He does a lot of perimeter walking. So the teacher saw it as really distracting, so she rolled up the rug and the map went away because it was just too much. And that was one of our really big obstacles that year. And so now the map came back in 6th grade. You'll see him throughout the day, he'll come over. So it is still a focus of his. And Phyllis has incorporated into ways of conversation with him.
Right before spring break, when everybody was going all to their different locations, we talked about where everybody was going to go on spring break, and I was going to Tennessee, and he was going to Wyoming, and so we had a great conversation about that.
I think one of the things that has made Nicholas very successful in his class is that the other kids in the class respect him for who he is. One of the best examples is that he loves Picasso. Knows a ton about him, has a collection of books, and he is now painting and drawing his own Picassos. He was given the opportunity to do a presentation on Picasso, sort of within the scope of what they were doing in the classroom, and he did a PowerPoint presentation on Picasso. And it blew the other kids away because they looked and said, oh my gosh, you know so much about this. And it was interesting to them too. It wasn't something that they couldn't relate to. So for him to be able to go in and do a presentation on something that he loved so much was fabulous for him. It gave him so much confidence. He was just so happy to go in and do it.
Okay. So I love that clip because of the rug. And I think those are the kinds of things that we get hung up on a lot. He can't look at the rug. If you watch that clip, as I have 100 times probably, but carefully, you'll see that what Nicholas does is, and we talked about the movement differences last time, how some kids need patterns in order to get their bodies to move effectively or efficiently. You'll notice that he actually does transition out of the room. They're leaving the room. And in order to transition out of the room, what he does is he goes and he runs around the map about 2 or 3 times, and nobody cues him, nobody comes near him, no assistant provides a warning or an instruction. He does it 3 times, and then all the way on his own, he picks up his book and he goes out the door. So it was a way for him to kind of make that. We said transitions can be really hard for kids. He found an accommodation. He went around the map. But if you have a teacher that says we're not going to do that anymore, you're in trouble. And so this teacher, Phyllis, who's just a wonderful person and a wonderful teacher, she understood the importance of that, and she also used it again, as she said, to get to know all of her other kids. So one of the tools that I talk about a lot during this kind of workshop is maybe making this strength-based curriculum map with your team. And you could do one just, you could do it around any number of subject areas. I have a couple of different subjects here. I certainly don't have every subject that a student or every skill area. You could customize it. But the reason that you don't see everything here that's just around behavior is because I feel that all of these things of working with kids on the things that they care about and changing up what the curriculum or the instruction would look like, or thinking about tying this in, all of these are preventative behavior supports. And so you don't have to focus in particular on how to tie in that fascination to what the kid's actually struggling around. And I also say you don't have to use every single thing that you come up with. You may only use a few things that you come up with. So maybe you end up with 50 ideas from a strength-based curriculum map, but you only end up using 4 or 5 of them. And so the process can be just a couple of minutes, but you can end up getting a lot of really good material, so that you see that, for example, this young man with social skills, somebody at the team came up with, he doesn't tell us how he feels. And that, of course, is a big part of behavior. We don't know how he's doing. So the mom, I think, came up with the idea, we could use weather language. Like we could say, how are you feeling today? Are you feeling gloomy? Are you, feeling like it's a cloudy day or whatever? And he would never answer this before. And he would just say, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. But after they introduced this, he could say things like, partly cloudy, chance of rain. And they would say, you know what, go ahead and take 5. Why don't you go in your room? Why don't you go do some breathing? Why don't you just relax for a little bit? Why don't you read? And she said, just by changing the language, he was able to be more expressive, which of course helps us in supporting him to do his best work and maybe not to have that meltdown. If you want to know more about how to use fascinations, I mean, I could go on and on about this. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. But go to the website. So there's my website, and it's paulacluth.com. And you'll see that the purple pencil is a readings tab. And if you look at that readings tab, you will find a section on autism. And if you look under the autism, you will find an article called Thank You, Bob Barker. And you'll see that the subtitle there is all about using passion, strengths, and areas of fascination. So if you're not in a position to go out and buy a book, you don't have to, because here's a free short article on the very same topic. So check that out and pass it on to somebody else if you think it may be helpful to them. All right, so 7, 8, and 8 are a little bit of a cheat. I'm putting them together because last time I shared with you a ton of visuals, and I'm going to share just a few more with you today. I don't think you have this slide, but I thought, well, I'm going to give you a few more just because we did talk about a lot of these, and I just want to jump ahead. I'll go back, I promise, but I want to just jump ahead and share with you that I did put a few more in because either I thought some of you might not have gone back through the other presentation, or you just might need a refresher. And so how do visuals help with behavior? Well, I specifically talked about that last time for helping with movement differences, but it helps kids, again, if they're not frustrated because of communication, a visual might help you express yourself. Do you want this? Do you need this? A visual may help, when you get a visual direction, like, here's the next thing you're going to do. You're going to choose a book. You're going to find a partner. If I can take all this language off and get away from you and you can use your cue cards, then I don't have, again, that adult kind of looming over you telling you what to do. Some of these visuals help you to be more independent. They help you to know exactly what's expected. They clarify a sequence. They kind of serve as a mini schedule in some cases. They can help anxieties disappear. Things like the top right is even like a little checklist. When you get here, here's what you need to do. A lot of kids, I said last time, that precision is incredibly comforting for them. So you'll have kids who come in feeling more organized. The middle, of course, is we talked last time about letting kids know where to stand in a classroom. This is an example of helping kids know where to sit. If you have kids who have a hard time knowing where to put their little body, this little taped off space is helping all little bodies, all little kids, but it's in particular for kids who might be struggling with just knowing where my body is in space and where it should be. And then finally, I put kind of an unusual visual down there. I just like this one. I thought, well, this might be an offshoot of something that somebody's dealing with. See this little moon hanger here? You put a piece of string on that and hang it on the child's door. So if any parents here, or you want to share ideas with parents who are having sleep problems, a lot of kids have biological, kinds of issues with the medicines that they're on, or just because they have so many sensory needs, or they have such an interesting diet, that all kinds of reasons that sleep is off. But for the kids that might be helped simply by some cues and some cognitive supports or emotional supports, you could try putting this on. And the other side of that little sign that hangs on the door shows the child waking up in the bed, or shows the child kind of chipper, with a chipper kind of smiling picture, and you put a sun in the right hand corner. And when it's time to go to bed, you flip that visual and you show a picture that they should be in bed and with their eyes closed. So these are the kinds of visuals that just give kids just a little bit more of a cue to download what is the appropriate behavior and kind of help you to build those positive supports. So think about anything that you're doing. Does this child need a visual? You're going to the store and you're struggling because, your child doesn't do very well at the store or at the mall. So again, can you take out a visual? Can you grab a dry erase board and let them know, these are the 2 stores we're going to. These are the 2 things we're buying at each one of these 2 stores. So that kind of thing. Is it clear to the person what I should anticipate? What's actually happening to me right now? What are the expectations? Where do I put these things? All those things can be answered through visuals. And as I told you last time, even picking up the pencil and just narrating as the person's, in that space, if you're very calm, that can be helpful too. So the one that I wanted to specifically hone in on this time was the video modeling, because as I said, this is one of those supports that you see again and again in the literature, and it has so many great uses. And that's why I wanted to share it with you, even though some of you may have used this before, but I thought, well, I'll share some new resources with you potentially. This is Chu Chow walking down the hallway with his buddy. We were trying to work on him just getting down the hall without kind of redecorating the class, with redecorating the bulletin boards in the hallway. He'd pull things off the hall. That was the behavior. And so we got him a buddy and took some video, and until we had that video model where he looks really calm and his hands at his side, we had a really hard time breaking through to get him to engage in the preferred behavior. So the video for him really helped. And Temple Grandin maybe says it best here, that many kids, not just kids on the autism spectrum, but many kids are visual thinkers. And Temple says folks on the spectrum, they think in pictures. I do not think in language. My thoughts are like videos running in my imagination. I love this quote, and it's one that you can oftentimes share with teachers, maybe even in the beginning of the year, if you're a parent with your child's materials, to remind that teacher, if what you're doing isn't working in the way of giving directions, maybe try a picture, maybe try drawing something, maybe try an image, maybe try, sketchnoting, but maybe move away from words if you need an alternative. If you don't know what a video model is, I want to share this oldie but a goodie with you. These, I told you I have middle schoolers. These are my little drowned rats out of the bathtub. Several years ago when I first was using video modeling in my seminars. And this will just give you an idea about what is a video model. I showed you Chu Chow walking through the hallway. Well, you don't have to use video modeling just to get kids to engage in a certain behavior. You can use it to teach a skill or task. And sometimes if you teach a skill or task, like how to use equipment appropriately, then it's a preventative behavior support, right? So here's just a video. I'm not going to show you just a quick clip. If you're saying, what do you exactly mean by a video model? It's essentially you are shooting a video of that person. That's a video self model, which is the most common kind. But you're shooting a video of that person engaging in the behavior that you want them to repeat and successfully acquire. And so this is my kids learning to set the table.
This one. I want to pick this one.
Good.
I really like this yellow fork. I really like this orange fork. I really like that light blue cup. I really like this. I really like this yogurt. I really like this yogurt. We love each other, right? I got the same as you. Yeah, we always love each other. We love you.
So I hope you got as much big a kick out of that as I did the first time when I actually shot the video, because that was probably 5 minutes after my older daughter had thrown a My Little Pony at the head of my younger daughter. So I guess filming kids can bring out the best in them in other ways as well. But I show that because it's just a very simple video, no setup. I'm just having them engage in a task. They're going to repeat that task, and then we're going to watch it several times so they can kind of download it. And for chores, it really worked for my kids. Now, what a lot of folks say, yeah, but Paula, I can't get the kid to do the behavior. So if I could get him to do it, then maybe I could make a video. But I bring you back to Chu Chow here. I couldn't get Chu Chow to engage in the correct behavior either. So I just shot over the course of a couple days until I got a very short snip of what I wanted. And then I just looped that over and over again so that it kind of coaxes the child into thinking, oh yeah, I am pretty good at this. You can even add some captions to the video, or even your voice with a little social story about keeping my hands at my side. So that's what you're going to try to do, is you have to edit the video heavily. And I that's what I call the Steven Spielberg method, is you edit and direct a little bit more heavily. And then you can actually make the child look more competent than they are. You can use a stunt double. I had a young man who had major breakdowns getting on the bus after school. And a lot of kids, why do they have major breakdowns? Well, we know because they have movement problems, movement challenges, and transitions are incredibly painful and difficult for them. So he would cry and gnash of teeth, not because he was trying to test the teachers, or not because he, didn't like the bus driver as we thought, but that was a theory. It was because the transitions were just so challenging. And so what happened was we couldn't get him on the bus without tears, so we used a stunt double, and the stunt double was his brother. So you saw they both were about the same age. They both had, went to a Catholic school, wore white polo shirts to school, both blonde. And so we shot the brother jumping on the bus at the end of the day, back of his head, and running down the street to get to the bus. And this young man, Mitchell, of course, I'm sure he knew that wasn't him joyfully jumping on a bus. That's not really the point of fooling the person necessarily, as much as it is letting them see an image that we are selling as this person. So we're saying, look, here is Mitchell getting on the bus. We're helping him to see his body looking strong and powerful. And for so many kids, it's almost shocking how quickly some of these video supports can work. So sometimes it's not, the magic bullet, but I've seen it work so often that I'd like to encourage you to do two things. One is to go to this website. If you haven't been there to Model Me Kids yet, I'd like to invite you to go there. Model Me Kids is a website where you can actually watch a lot of videos. So for those of you that are thinking, well, I'm a speech path, or, oh, Paul, I'm a parent, I don't know how I would do all of these. You can go to Model Me Kids and see if your children are even interested in the videos. So what you're going to do is just click on these ages tabs, and that will bring you to the different kinds of videos that they offer. So I'm going to go to tips and tricks here. And this is going to bring me to a sample video. And now you as teachers or you as parents, you can say, I wonder if this would fly for my child. Now, I told you that a video model is a model of the child, him or herself. But then I told you, if you can't get that, you can use a stunt double. If you can't even use a stunt double, or you don't have time, you might try commercial videos. Commercial videos might work for certain behaviors and for certain kids, and they may be especially helpful in teaching kids discrete behaviors. So this one is actually on deep breathing, and one resource I really like for video modeling, I shouldn't say one resource, one way I like to use video modeling is that not to have the child watch themselves engage in a certain kind of a routine, which I like that too, but I love using it to teach a strategy. So let's just say the child doesn't know how to ask for help, or the child doesn't know how to follow a certain direction, or the child doesn't understand how to handle the iPad gently and appropriately, or the child doesn't know how to breathe and count his breath. You could teach it through a video. So let's take a look here.
Deep breathing. Everyone feels stressed sometimes. That's just a part of life. The important thing is how I handle stress. I don't want to get upset and lose control. So before I start to feel really pressured, I take deep breaths to stay calm. Take a look. Charlie is nervous about a math test. Before he starts the test, Charlie wants to calm down. He takes deep breaths. This calms him down. Now he's relaxed. He is ready to take the math test.
So you get the idea, and it's just such a wonderful resource. They have videos for ages 2 to 13 and then 9 to 21. And every single video that they have, they're going to give you a sample video to watch. So I think that's really nice. They have an app with some samples as well. So I don't work for them or anything like that, but I just do talk them up a lot because I think for those that even just want to learn about video modeling, it's a great resource. So that might be one to add to your arsenal, and maybe let other people know about it too, because as I said, visuals and video, it can be so powerful. And it can be one of those supports for children that is very unobtrusive. For an older child, they could have that video right on their phone, and they could watch a little video of, how they're calming down. They could watch a little video of how they're supposed to, learn to breathe. They could watch, sorry, talking's getting to my voice, I guess. And they, of course, could watch it more than once. But a younger child, too, even if it's not something that's going to be on their phone, but just for a younger kid to be able to watch that as many times as they need. And then they don't need, again, an adult over their shoulder sitting next to them with their cues, because they may be able to watch the video as prep. So anyway, I think it's a very powerful support. People use video modeling for several different things. And so some things that you might consider, and again, you'll get some of these ideas on Model Me Kids, but for any different kind of routine, like learning how to, get my food in a cafeteria, for any kind of classroom structures. So if kids need to learn, if you're having a kid who's really having a hard time with, again, major transitions, going from station to station or center to center, those literacy times, choosing a book out of the classroom library, you can use it to teach any kind of a skill. So if kids, I know a kid, for example, that really struggles on the playground rather. And so teaching him how to use all of the equipment really helped a lot, in showing him videos of himself on the playground, because he only wanted the swing, and he would get very upset if somebody else was on the swing, and that caused a rift every single day. So they made video of different kids on different kinds of equipment, and that really bolstered his interest in different activities on the playground. He also had a hard time coming in from recess, so they made a video model of him, the whistle blowing, and him coming in from recess. Another place that you can get more information is from a book that I love called Lights, Camera, Autism. And there are 2 of them now, Lights, Camera, Autism books. And all of those books have come with a DVD with a bunch of sample videos. And so if you're somebody that, has, wants to make a little investment and teach this to other people or learn about it yourself, those resources are really wonderful. And so those are the ones that I probably endorse the most. Okay, so anyway, check that one out if you're not already doing it. And if you're already using video modeling, maybe think about changing it up a little bit. If you're not having success, maybe try, if you're not having success with a commercial video, try using the child himself. Maybe try making the video a little shorter, or maybe a little longer, or maybe adding a social story to it in the way of captions or your own voice. So again, sometimes it's not so much that the video won't work, it's just that we haven't hit on the right combination as of techniques as a director, producer, if you will. So keep that in mind. All right, 2 more things I want to say before we finish up here. Number 9 is get it off the page. Really keep in mind that, movement is necessary for all kinds of things, but movement is necessary as a preventative behavior strategy, and it's necessary as a way to deal with stress. There's a newish book out called Spark by a physician named John Rady. And Rady writes a lot about how movement helps not only with creativity, it helps with learning. And again, think about our kids that struggle with learning problems, how much they will need it. And it's also a preventative behavior support. It's also helpful for anxiety. And we know so many kids with anxiety. In fact, Rady shares a study in the book where they compare certain antidepressants with a running condition, if you will, and people did just as well in either. So whether they were running or using the antidepressant. So it's not that antidepressants didn't work, it was that antidepressants worked, but so did running. So that's interesting, right? So we know that it can really help kids with mood. And so if you've got kids who have behavior issues because they're so depressed or anxious, think about what their day looks like. One of the things that I tell parents of older kids and teachers of older kids is you can really use the daily schedule to your benefit here. To have students maybe if you've got a kid with a lot going on and they really seem uncomfortable in their own body, maybe create a different schedule for them, an alternative schedule where they have more than one physical education period, if that's pleasing to the person, that is. Or put gym and exercise period in a place in the day where they're most likely to get a lot of benefit. So maybe right before they have to have their reading class, that's where a student with learning disabilities should have physical education. That you would want to let kids know about this. So if you've got older kids, for example, let them know about the benefits of movement. And so that they might be able to go for a run before they do their homework, or that they might want to join a sport or something like that, or maybe join the cross country or just take a walk. Yeah, somebody's asking, Sherry, is Spark a book? It is a book. It is a popular press book, Spark, and all this that I'm telling you right now is in that book. It's a really interesting read if you like movement and you're interested in active learning and responsive classroom. It's really, really helpful. But it's about more than teaching too. It's just about, the body and all the benefits of movement. We know that it's really a helpful preventative behavior support for kids with ADHD, and it's an incredibly helpful support for kids on the autism spectrum. So we should never take recess away. Never, never, never. And the other thing we should do, back to my recommendation earlier on, is teach those structured games, because we have a lot of kids that I don't think perimeter walking is the worst thing in the world for a kid to do during recess. Like, I don't think that's awful. Some kids actually use that meditatively. But if kids would like to be in games and they're not, then I think that's terrible. So we want to, I even found a great, website at one point. I'm not sure if I could find it today, but I think if you go to the internet now, you could find, what are the rules of some of these games. Even in elementary school, go to your student councils and say, hey guys, how many different games are going during at lunch? And during our lunch recess, how many kids are playing what games? Is it only competitive kickball, or, let's get some other things going. Could some of the sixth graders lead some games for kids that want to play, so that students aren't just on the playground, but they're actually moving? Let your lunch monitors, your recess monitors know how important it is for kids to exercise. Have them lead kids right before they line up with some jumping jacks. There's a lot we can do. And I find for a lot of kids with disabilities, oftentimes they have fewer opportunities to move in a day, especially if they're not included. They may transition less often than their peers. They may, again, not be as active at recess. So there's plenty of reason why it's really important to think about this as something that we should take on, as far as maybe adding in some structure. There's a little article I thought some of you might be interested in here. If you go to Autism Speaks, you will find this article. So I just thought I'd show you this. And I'm taking this little excerpt out here. But if you just do a little search for this, can exercise improve behavior, there's some data here about ADHD in this page, even though it's from Autism Speaks. And what this Dr. Curry says is that exercise can reduce repetitive behaviors, off-task behavior, mouthing, self-injury, disruptiveness, and aggression. Exercise and movement is really good for you. And we don't just see these behaviors immediately, but for several hours after. For learning benefits, it appears like students may need more spurts of exercise and movement, so be aware of that. But we want to make sure that our students are getting what they need in the way of the body. And so one thing that you can do is you can talk to your physical education department. What does the movement, look like for kids who, that may have some struggles? How can we use, is there equipment that we can get that will help them become more active? What kinds of exercises would they recommend? How about a walking club before school or after school for kids who don't run? Like, those are the kinds of things that we can be thinking about. And again, this is stuff we would pass on not only to parents, but to kids too, so that they're aware of potential benefit. I was talking to one dad who has a little guy on the autism spectrum, and he he said that once he learned this, he went home and he had his child run up and down the hallway between every homework math problem, and he said it was the first time they finished the whole worksheet. So think about what this could look like. And again, if you want more information, the Rady, not only is the John Rady book really interesting, but again, the name spelled R-A-T-E-Y, you could also look at that because he's got a YouTube video, like a little TED Talk. And it's about 15 minutes if you're interested in learning more about, it's not about just learning, but it's just about movement and the benefits of movement and how good it is for us. I know it got me moving more after I read the book. Okay, I want to show you, let's see. Yeah, I'm going to very quickly show you, it's a 2-minute video about what it looks like in the classroom to create materials that offer a little bit more movement. Oopsie. Oh, I guess I have to go to my videos to get it for you. But this is from that DVD that I was talking to you about. So I was telling you that I had the DVD for You're Gonna Love This Kid. And I shot a little video about just using movement in the classroom and what we call getting it off the page. So I thought I would just show you this really
One
quick
of the
clip.
differentiation techniques that I'm always yelling at people about is get it off paper. So what I mean by that is, for math, for instance, instead of filling out a number, the dreadful number 1 to 100, we'll do a number line where they can hop. They can hop the even numbers. They can hop the odd numbers. We'll use the human calculator where children can actually stand and there's a calculator on the floor and they can tap it out. And many of my students have really poor fine motor skills and need a lot of movement. So if they can get out of the chair and out of the book, it's always much better and really more successful for them. And all the kids love it.
This is the kind of thing that really helps kinesthetic learners and active students in our classrooms.
We are the rocks. We are the rocks. We are the rocks in the rock cycle.
I am lucky to have 5 Alpha Smarts in my classroom, and the students absolutely have become independent working with Alpha Smarts over the year. I think just the motivation of having this little laptop on their desk helps them stay engaged in activities. Kids with autism who use Alpha Smarts, I feel like actually can get better work done. I really feel like having the Alpha Smart available, particularly with kids who struggle with fine motor skills, allows them to get more finished. It's faster, it's more efficient, I can respond to it quickly. I just feel like it's what they need.
Okay, so I included that last bit there about the getting it off the page being not just movement, but also involving the typing. And this is before this is Chicago Public Schools, that's before they had many iPads in place. And so I included that because even though the movement is maybe the most important part of that clip, I'm kind of like, signaling us back to my earlier conversation about curriculum and instruction, where we have a lot of students who are being asked to write, and it's very, it's very hard for them to feel successful if they don't, instead of if it's like chiseling it out of stone, as we talked about earlier. And so think about what it might look like for your students to get it off the page, not only in some of those learning activities, but also that recommendation that I made earlier about if you're seeing a lot of resistance because of longhand, because of writing, then you might want to think about, are we offering enough assistive technology to those students? Because that can make a big difference too. Before we leave this, one of our participants, Sherry Nelson, has made a really nice comment. Dr. Lauren Lieberman, and I'm going to repeat that, Dr. Lauren Lieberman, Lieberman, has some great information on adaptive PE activities and also on inclusion and lifelong fitness for children with disabilities. So wonderful resource. Thank you, Sherry. And again, so important, especially in this context of behavior. And again, just for health. I mean, we should all be thinking, about these kinds of issues for our own families and our own, daily, daily routine. So I appreciate the extra resource. Thank you for that. Alrighty. So I want to offer you just one last little tip here. I hope that you'll think about, think about this off the page idea in several different ways. And as a way to, again, even in tying into curriculum and instruction, because there are lots of ways to promote really kind of joyful learning with movement. But I wanted to just leave just a few minutes here too for number 10, which is something I end with a lot for lots of presentations, because I always think, if you've tried everything and if at first you don't succeed, and maybe some of the things that we've changed the curriculum, and we also built a relationship, and the day's going along swimmingly, and we've started using video, but still there's still some challenges in the day for this person. I say no matter how good the day is shaped up to be, or the year, you might still want to always offer some safe space, because even somebody who's functioning really well, and we have a lot of great things in place, they may still need respite. And I remember reading an article at one point, or maybe it was a book chapter, where a mother was saying, my child's whole, high school years were made possible from a wonderful teacher that gave him a safe space. And the safe space was like a counselor's office or something. And she said, if you ever met my child in the school years, you would know from him that his safe space was this office, because he would tell everybody, about the safe space. But she said what was so funny was that he never used it. She, to her knowledge, she had never even used it once. But for him, it was enough knowing that it was available to him. And that was the comfort, just knowing it was going to be there. So I thought that just stuck with me. And I started, after that, I always talked about safe space. What he ended up doing was using just the same space that everybody else used, which was, I think, the library. So that could be a study area, an alternative space, or some other room. But even if things are going great, you might want to have a little respite. And that's always prevention, not punishment. And the other thing I'll say about this is make it available to anybody, not just students with identified needs. And I just have a little blog post in there from a blogger called Another Glorious Day. She has a little safe space there right in her classroom that looks kind of fancy. This is one from Chicago Public Schools that's just an old chair with some headphones, but there's another kind of jazzed up, I guess, version of a safe space. So that's all I have for us. I don't see other questions in the queue, but I certainly could take one or two if we can do that. Otherwise, you do have all my information, and I would love to see you sign up, for my newsletter on paulacluth.com, or come and see me in these other places. But if you've joined me for just one or for several, I really do appreciate that you came and that you hung in there for 6 hours. And I hope that if you do have some follow-up questions, that you'll let us know, and that you'll implement, if not all of these, at least a few of them, and maybe even starting right away tomorrow.
All right, Paula, it's Robin.
Hi, Robin.
Hi, finally. And I'm just so grateful that you did this first series this year. Always wonderful information, and so great that people can access this on the ITC for the next 2 years. So
great.
I just want to thank you. I've gotten several emails from people saying how wonderful this is. So I'm just really grateful to you, and so happy I finally got to chime in.
Me too.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And be sure and complete the evaluation. That's great. And then join us again for another series in February. So happy holidays, everyone. And thank you again, Paula. Just a treat as usual.
Thank you. Thanks, Robin. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Good night.